Hi everyone and welcome to the Investors Corner. I'm Ian Macbeth. I'm joined with Avocado Properties Lettings Director Andy Brown, co-host. Hello. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good.
Good. Yeah, very excited for this episode. What is going on with Google? What are people searching in for landlords? We're going to give you the answers. So I think, did we do a top 10 or have we got a top 14, I think?
Top 14.
We're 14
going
questions.
Extra detail.
Yeah, this is exactly what people are typing into Google, including the phrase landlord. So this is relevant to first-time landlords, existing landlords, letting agents. It's probably, I would say, also interesting for tenants that are potentially listening as well. So we're going to get stuck into those. This particular episode is sponsored by Survey Network. If you are watching, not listening, you'll see I've got the branded coffee cup next to me with my... I was going to say the brand then and plug the actual mushroom tea, but this is mushroom hot chocolate. So by the time I finish that, I am going to be ready for questions and answers. Andy, first question. This is no particular order, by the way, but are landlords responsible for mould?
Interesting one, because you've got a lot of people out there that think landlords are responsible for it, but in reality, it all depends on what that mould is caused by. So you've got tenant responsibilities like, ventilating the property correctly. So the initial thing is that, yes, it is a landlord responsibility to investigate how that mould is appearing. Mm-hmm. But dependent on what the report says when it comes back will depend on whether it's the landlord's responsibility or a tenant's responsibility, because contractors that go to a property, they'll either report that, look, there's structural issues to the property that is causing that particular mould. Mm-hmm. And that could be, what we tend to find is that mould could be that's appearing on a ceiling or side walls or something like that. So if that's the case, then yes, the landlord does need to sort it out, and it's their responsibility to sort it out because it's structural.
It's kind of outside of the tenant's ability to...
Exactly. The tenant can't do anything about that, and you can't expect a tenant to know what they need to do or pay for those costs because it's structural. But if the contractor comes back and says, look, the mould is appearing around the windows because the windows aren't being opened and there's proper ventilation not happening at that property, then it's the tenant's responsibility. Yeah. It could also be that, look, the tenant's got minimal space within their property and they need to hang their washing up in the living room. Well, doing that will cause some type of condensation within that room. And if they do that, then they need to open up the windows. That's just the way that it is.
I think that's a common reason why. There's two common reasons what I've seen over the years from renting properties out is the bathroom, where, maybe you're... Let's say, for example, you've got a one-bed masonette, which comes to mind. I own a one-bed masonette that's been rented out. Now, the bathroom window fronts onto the square, effectively. So if you open that window wide, everyone can see everything you've got to offer.
Yeah, not very private.
And you may not want to show that off, or you may, depending on who you are. It depends which tenant I've got in there at the time. But I did have that particular circumstance where a bit of mould started to form in the ceiling, and kind of the answer to it that I looked at was, that's a difficult one, because yes, the tenant's responsible for opening that window, but I can also understand that they may not want to, because the window opens to, a public area effectively. Yeah. So I looked at it as, okay, well, I need to work with the tenant to try and fix the current problem. And then when the tenancy ended, do I need to replace the extractor fan? Do I need to review the paint that I've got and maybe get some mould resistant paint? And it's kind of a bit of common sense, but in reality, I could have probably been strong and said, look, you just need to make sure you ventilate properly. Open the bathroom door after you've had a shower.
Exactly.
Yeah. Open the window then so you can get the dew out. Don't close the bathroom door after the shower. So, let it ventilate around the apartment a little bit and have a bit of common sense. And then the other one is the washing, obviously. So,
but that's interesting. With the bathroom, I mean, if you're renting a property, going back to the paint that you've just described, you can get anti-mold paint, which should really be used in any bathroom anyway. You know, if you're just using a matte paint because it's cheap and cheerful, and you're renting a property and you want to bring costs down, well, further on down the line, you're going to incur other costs because you're going to have to fix it, right?
Yeah.
You know, we had a landlord probably about 3 years ago that kept having mould issues within the bathroom. And we had a contractor go around there, use the correct paint. There's never been any issues since. Okay, so it's just little wins like that can solve a problem for you and for the tenant as well. Now, as it stands now, what I've just said is currently what it is. But when the renters' rights bill comes in, it will be a landlord responsibility, regardless of what a tenant's doing and whether they're ventilating the property correctly. Any mould issues, it's what they call Awab's law. And that's going to come into effect with any mould issue within a property. It is the landlord's responsibility. You cannot ask a tenant to do anything with it. You can guide them in the right way, but you can't tell the tenant that they need to do something cost-wise, because it is going to be a landlord responsibility. And those mould issues need to be dealt with within a specific time frame as well. So that's not in play yet, but probably by the beginning of next year, it will be a landlord responsibility.
So if you've got a tenant break in contract and you're changing tenants between now and then, it's worth a little review as a landlord.
Absolutely.
That's the tip to take away probably from this. If it's not relevant to you now, but you can see it might be worth just doing that little bit of extra due diligence.
Exactly.
On your property you're
Get your property ready before these changes happen. You've set up for it. You're going to have no issues further on down the line, hopefully. So yeah, it's just about being prepared.
Cool. Quick and easy one then, this one. Can landlords refuse pets? Now, I'd assume it's a lot of tenants typing that into Google.
Yeah.
But potentially landlords that have been asked that question, you know, let's say, for example, you've got a 2-bed house, it's a professional couple moving in, and they've got a cockapoo that they want to bring with them, hypoallergenic, no potting. What is the landlord's scenario there? You know, they've got a tenant, they've got an offer. Let's say it looks like the tenant on paper looks great, but they've got a dog. What legally can and can't a landlord say at that point?
Okay, so a landlord can decide whether they want pets or not. It's totally up to them. It's their property. They can decide. Now, this is as it is now. Again, there will be changes, which I'll go through shortly. But you've got to weigh it up in the fact that, look, there's a lot of professional couples out there at the moment, and lots of families that have some type of pet now. It seemed to have exploded when the pandemic happened and everyone got a dog or a cat. So right now, you know, a lot of applicants that we're registering have a pet. So if you want the best people in your property and you want a wide variety of people to offer on your property, then you need to be willing to accept pets, because you're losing some great people, okay, great tenants, if you don't accept pets. Okay, so my advice is, look, you may not want pets. You know, you're always going to have type of situations where you'll not allow pets in your property because it will go against the head lease if you've got an apartment, for example, which is fine. You know, then you can refuse it. But if you've got a 2-bed terraced or a 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom property, then to get the best tenants, you've got to accept pets. And don't forget, we can, you know, insert clauses within a tenancy agreement to say that the property is defumigated at the end of the tenancy, carpets are professionally cleaned, etc., etc. Any damage that has been caused by the pet specifically, then the tenants are responsible for that. And the tenants sign to say that they agreed to that. So there's certain things in there that you can protect yourself if any damage is caused, or you know, the property may smell of dog at the end. Well, that's where the fumigation comes into effect.
I guess it's a little bit as part of what type of pet, what your personal experience is. I guess for a landlord, if they've had a bad experience, let's say, you know, they've accepted pets before. Someone's got 2 golden retrievers, for example, you know, fluffy dogs, you know, and great dogs, you know, well mannered normally, but you know, they can get jumping in swamps and they can be a bit stinky, and then the hair can get everywhere. If you've got that experience where you've gone to someone's house and it's not the pet's fault, but the actual owners are not frequent with the hoover and the cleaning and stuff, and you just get that kind of waft of wet dog, then you might feel a bit negative about it. But in legal terms, it's up to up to the landlord.
It's up to the landlord. And like I said, the way that I do things is, right, if you've got a dog that's at home, do you work from home? Mm-hmm. Because if you work from home, then you're with the dog most of the day, and it's not left to its own devices where it's going to get bored and, start causing a bit of damage or playing or anything like that. Is it a well-trained dog? How long have you had the dog for? Et cetera, et cetera. So it's sort of a qualifying the pet. I know it sounds weird, but that's the extra information that you're getting from an applicant. If you had a 2-bedroom apartment and you allowed pets, and it was quite a small apartment, then you're not going to have a pet that's a massive Great Dane dog, are you? Because it's it just doesn't suit that type of property.
This is why I still think it's important for landlords to have the ability to communicate with the tenant either through a managing agent, a letting agent, or direct themselves. I don't know how it works with open rent. I don't know what level of communication they get, but it would strike me as something that if you were using a service like an open rent, this probably isn't as much of that communication in terms of that scenario, so that if there was a problem in 6 months' time, it's a bit standard, it's a bit boxy let, rather than with a bit of common sense. So something for people to think about.
And there's other things that if you wanted to accept tenants and they had a dog and you're still unsure, then you can get the tenants to maybe take out like pet insurance. Where they, if there's any damage caused in the property, then that's sort of covered by that. So there's ways that you can protect yourself. You shouldn't decline it straight away. Protect yourself in doing the things with the tenancy clauses and all of that sort of stuff, and appeal to the whole market rather than just a specific certain of applicants that are looking. Mm-hmm. Now, when the Renters' Rights Bill comes in, probably beginning next year, part of the changes is that you cannot unreasonably withhold consent for a tenant to have a pet. Okay, so that's a big change, because that's taken away what landlords can and can't do. But again, if you've got a reasonable explanation on why you don't want a pet in there, i.e. it goes against the head lease of the property, something like that, then fine. But if you've got no explanation at all on why a pet can't be in that property, then you will have to accept it anyway.
Yeah. And that's within the tenancy. They've got it's a couple or a young family that decided, right, we're going to get the family pet. Circumstances change there.
Yeah.
How much can landlords increase rent by in 2025? Let's assume you're in tenancy for this question.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, there's no rent controls or anything like that in the UK. They were talking about it. It quickly got put to one side, as we're not doing a Scotland type thing where you can just increase the rent by a certain level. So as we currently are, you can increase the rent by however much you want to increase it. But by going to a tenant that's been in your property and asking for a £300 a month increase, more than likely they're not going to pay that. More than likely they'll find somewhere else to live. Then your property is going to be remarketed. It's not going to achieve the price that you want it to, because looking at the comparables, you've got no chance because everything is less. So there's just no point in trying to do that.
Yep.
Normally what I say is, or how I deal with things is, look at if the property is coming up for renewal and you can increase the rent on renewal. Look at comparables within the last 6 months. Look at properties that have been on the market within sort of a half a mile radius of where yours is, and then see what those rates are, because that determines the market for your specific property in that specific area. So if they're paying a rent of $1,200 and the rent and the properties are on the market for $1,250, then a £50 a month increase isn't too severe. Mm-hmm. And that's more than acceptable, and tenants would probably know that there's going to be some type of increase. Or you just go in line with the retail price index, which includes the housing, and if that's increased by 3%, then increase it by 3%. But I think gone are the days where you can increase your rent by 10%, 12%, 14%. We're not in London. Some areas in London you could probably do that, but I think keeping it a minimal increase to keep the tenants happy, to keep the tenants in your property, especially when they're good ones as well, then just be realistic with it and don't overshoot it. Because if you overshoot it and you have to market the property again because the tenants leave, then you could be in a situation where you're not even going to get that rent.
And I think landlords have seen over the last 5 years a 25-30% increase in rent anyway. So if it's in line with that, it's gone up quite a lot. Now, I appreciate so have interest rates and so have costs, so there is an element of has that outweighed that. I don't think costs have gone up as much as the rent has probably gone up.
No.
But some people's interest rates, depending on what sort of loan to value they've got, potentially is squeezing where they're at with it. So there's an element of that, but there's not a rule book to it as such that says you must or you must not. How do landlords pick tenants?
It's a tricky one, this, because
it's a grey area.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, it is a grey area because they don't have certain opinions on certain tenants. It all depends on who comes through the door and what offers are put on the table. Now, obviously, with referencing, we get the employment reference, we do the credit checks, we do the landlord reference, all of that sort of stuff. And it could come down to the fact that, look, you've got 3 offers on the table. They've all offered the asking price. They're all full-time employment. They all cover the affordability, and they've all rented previously. Or you could have one that hasn't rented previously. So if you put that forward to the landlord, it could come down to the fact that, look, you're all great applicants on paper, but one may have rented for 2 years more than the other one. Or a couple may be earning £10,000 more per annum compared to the other ones.
Yeah, you're splitting hairs.
And it comes down to the details like that. Yeah. It's fine details. Yeah. So it's nothing majorly specific. We may get landlords that say, I want a professional couple to move into the property. Fine. But it'll still have 3 offers on the table from those professional couples. And like I said, it could come down to salary, it could come down to how many years they've rented, or it could come down to how long have they been in employment for. If you've got let's say a professional couple and they've both been in new jobs for 3 months compared to someone that's been in their current employment for 10 years, is there a risk with the 3 months compared to the 10 years? And
it's what the landlord's mindset is on it as well. We talk about what is the goal? Is it a long-term project? Is it short-term? Is it? We've got an investor coming in about an hour's time after this podcast, and the question is: are they looking for short-term gains, long-term gains? Are they looking for retirement planning? What is the target? I use my personal experience. I had a property where someone moved in, and at the time it wasn't when it was popping with tenants everywhere. So it was about finding a good tenant that I felt would fit the bill. Now, that tenant moved in and they just about fit the financial metrics, 30 times rent, for example, back then, as it was just really simple. Past referencing. Since then, when I served that tenant notice because of a change of circumstances, I found it really hard for the tenant to move out because they were on a low income and therefore they found it really difficult after all the rent climbs to then go and find another property because they didn't meet that criteria. So they were looking at council options. So now for me, the splitting of hairs would be more based around how much do they earn in a view of upsizing.
Yeah.
Because in my head, I'm thinking if the tenant moves in and they could afford £2,000 a month, but my property's 1,200, when it comes to potentially moving out, they shouldn't have a problem finding another property, especially if it's a 1-bed, it's the bottom of the market. Whereas other landlords might look at it and say, well, I just want whoever's going to pay the most. For me, that's not the most important. It's the ease of serving notice in reality at that point. So it just depends on, I think, the landlords as well a little bit.
And it depends on what type of property you've got as well. So if you've got, let's say, a 2-bedroom terrace property in Bracknell, let's say, and it's close to the schools, then if you've got a family that move in there with a kid that's going to go to that school, they're probably going to stay longer than just a professional couple moving in. So again, it could come down to things like that with do you want the long term, do you want the shorter term type stuff. So again, landlords weigh that up.
Do we? We don't have a crystal ball, so it's all a little bit kind of if buts and maybes, but with a bit of educated guessing, basically.
Yeah.
The next question is: do landlords check credit scores? Which are kind of wrapped up in that question. So I kind of skipped past it because it happens within the referencing, right?
Yeah, you've got to get it done. If you get landlords that, if you're a landlord that does everything yourself and just get written references and doesn't credit check a tenant, then then yeah, I wouldn't want to be you. But most landlords will get the proper referencing done, which automatically includes the credit check.
Yeah.
So yeah, more than likely it's done.
The next question I think is probably a question that a lot of new landlords or people looking to become landlords are typing into Google is what landlords need to know by law, which is quite an interesting one because we obviously get a lot of feedback from a social media campaign that we run for effectively a quiz that you've created using a particular type of software for landlords just to check if they're compliant. Totally free. You know, just pop in your details, answer how many questions? 20 questions?
20 questions.
20 questions, and it gives you a score and feedback on whether you're compliant. Now, in that social media campaign, we get quite a few comments on it. You know, you get your classic social trolls, and people are kind of almost assuming that if you're a landlord, everyone is 100% compliant. But we obviously have the information from the 200 odd landlords that have completed the quiz. And it's quite disturbing, actually, what landlords do and don't know by law. So I think this is an important question because, you know, there is a lot of legislation they need to know. We can't go through all of that now on this particular episode. We have other episodes where we've covered quite a lot of this. But just looking at the compliance quiz, it shows that there's a lot of work to do for landlords knowing if that's what they want to do, if they don't want to use a managing agent.
Yeah, I mean, we've had over 200 people reply to that quiz. Yeah. Only 5 have got 100%.
Jesus, I mean, that's...
So, and the average score of across all of those landlords is 60%. So that's 40% that you're potentially missing out on when you've potentially got penalties, fines, prosecution coming your way because you're not clued up with the legislation. And look, we get people out there that say that they know everything that they need to know about letting a property, and it's just not the case.
Yep.
You know, they think they know everything. They don't know everything. And, you know, there's over 170 pieces of legislation for lettings. And I can't name a landlord or ever met a landlord that can give me all of those 170 pieces of legislation.
Yeah.
So, look, the way that things are going at the moment with the Renters' Rights Bill coming in, there's a big focus on landlords. Okay, councils are more on top of landlords now. Government are making it harder for landlords too, with all of the new regulations that are going to come in. And for councils, you know, many councils out there are skint. Okay, and one of the money-making revenues that they can do is focus on landlords. And if you're not compliant as a landlord with gas safety certificates, EICRs, licenses, EPCs, maintenance at a property, anything like that, then they can fine you a maximum of £30,000. So when
they want the money in their bank.
Exactly. Yeah. If they can get the money to do it, they get the money. You know, you see all of these news articles coming out recently on sort of landlord websites, letting agent websites, and the fines that you are seeing being implemented is crazy. I mean, there's a news article the other day, landlord being fined £45,000 because he didn't get the gas safeties done. There was another landlord that got fined £156,000 for operating HMOs not correctly. So, and that's going to the councils. And then your tenant can get a rent repayment order as well. So you might have to pay back 12 months rent to a tenant. Yeah. So we get people out there that say, don't use a lettings agent. They don't know what they're doing. They know nothing. And it's just not the case. You've got to laugh at people like that. And if people are listening and they disagree with what I'm saying, then put some comments in, because I'll quite happily have a conversation and say that. But there's just so much that goes on within the lettings landscape that trying to keep up to date with everything, if it's not your full-time job, it's crazy. I think crazy.
The only thing that I would say in addition to that is there are landlords, and by the sounds of this, 98% of them that are not fully compliant, just based on that snapshot. But there's also a lot of letting agents which are not necessarily saying not compliant, but not aware.
Not aware, yeah.
They're not running a lettings agency as professionally as maybe you are, as an example, where you are prepared to offer these free services and these free quizzes and have these conversations with people. So that's why I think sometimes landlords tag a bad comment, because they put all letting agents in the same box. And in the same way you can't put all landlords in the same box, you can't put all managing agents in the same box as well,
Don't get me wrong, there's landlords out there that know exactly what they're doing. They've been doing it for the last 20 years. They're keeping up to date. They're on all of the newsletters. They're checking out the information. They're keeping up to date with the progress of the Renters' Rights Bill and all of that sort of stuff. That's great. That's amazing work. Well done for doing that. But there's a high percentage that don't know where to start, because the communication that comes out in regards to changes don't necessarily come out to those specific people. The government aren't good at, communicating the changes. So
what is actually the URL? What is the website? And we'll put the link obviously in the notes for this, but what is the URL for anyone that's listening and watching that wants to run that quiz themselves? Because it is free. It's 20 questions. So
the URL is landlordscorecard.scoreapp. Like I said, we'll drop it in the comments. But yeah, if you're a landlord, check it out. Even if you use a managing agent,
100%.
Still do it yourself.
100%.
And see what you know and what you don't know. The questions are set up for specific legislation parts where you're more at risk of renting a property, and it refers to the acts and everything in there. So it's detailed questions. So just be honest in your answers, and see what score you get. And if you get a score that's particularly low and you're worried about it, then reach out. It's free advice, free to have a chat. We can go for a coffee or whatever. But it's just to get your understanding of what you're missing and what the implications are of you missing it. Basically. So, like I said, it's
and if
free
you get
to
a bad score, you're not sending it off to the governing body. So fear not.
The information
we're not here to try and shop anyone. We're here to try and help people. Interesting one here. What happens if landlords don't fix things?
Well, if they don't fix things, potentially the tenant can make a claim against them.
So it's a broken window, broken boiler, broken tap.
I mean, and anything like that's going to disrupt the enjoyment of that property for a tenant. And if you don't fix it, well, the options are that if you don't fix it, they'll get legal advice. They can take you to court over it. They can get the council involved, and the council can serve an enforcement notice on you if things need to be done in that property for a health and risk point of view. Tenants can withhold rent if they feel that, let's say they've got no heating or hot water in the property and it's affecting their living standards, then they could withhold the rent to fix that issue. Okay, you might come back and say that you didn't agree to it, but if that ever went further on down the line or it went to court or anything like that for an arrears situation, you wouldn't get anywhere with it. Because it's affecting the living standards of the tenant. If it's something that the tenant has damaged themselves and they expect you to fix it, then that's a different scenario because they damaged it. So it's their responsibility. They're the ones that broke it. But anything like, appliances, broken windows, security issues, fire risk issues, heating, hot water, we just need to get it fixed, because there's nothing that you can do about it. And, if anything did happen further on down the line where you wanted to get possession of your property back and the tenants became difficult, then they could claim disrepair of that property, and you could be liable for a fine for that, or a rent repayment order coming back off that. So it's just not worth doing.
So if you're not fixing a boiler, it's midwinter, you got a young family in there, for example, you've got to get it done. Well,
you shouldn't be a landlord if you're not getting it done.
Absolutely. And I hear a lot of horror stories where, people don't, but, basic necessity of hot water and heating in the winter, you should be doing everything, moving heaven and earth to get that fixed as soon as physically possible. But again, if you've got a strong managing agent, you don't need to do the legwork on it. The managing agent will just give you the information and it's yes, no, but in your case scenario with, you, Pooja and Chloe, you will just take care of the work, and then it's a case of the landlord just giving you the thumbs up or thumbs down on maybe the contractor or the level of the job that's required.
Yeah.
And that makes it really easy for the landlord to kind of sit back and just go, okay, someone's looking after me.
Yeah. And it's the clarity of what the situation is. So it's not a case of that if the tenant reports a boiler issue, a contractor is sent out straight away. It's not like that at all. I'll take us as an example. We'll call the tenant. We'll try and triage the issue over the phone. Reset boiler. When did it happen? Where's it coming from? Pressure, all of that sort of stuff. And we'll ask about 10 to 15 questions to try and fix the issue over the phone.
Yep.
And if we've exhausted every option that we can physically do as non-qualified engineers, then at that point we may potentially have to send a contractor out. So it's like we diagnose everything.
Yep.
We put the issue towards the landlord saying we have done X, Y, and Z. These are the questions that we've asked. And a landlord is more than happy to send a contractor out. Where they're not happy or where there might be some frustration around it is if you go, the tenant's reported a boiler issue.
Yep.
Well, what's wrong with it?
Yeah. What is the issue?
What have you done about it?
Yeah.
What have we tried? And that's where the frustration comes in, because you're asking someone to pay money without a reason, without a diagnosis of what that issue is.
Yeah.
So it's like, have clarity on it, what the situation is, what questions are being asked, how we've tried to resolve it before you send a contractor out and before some money comes out of your pocket.
There's a couple of common quick fixes on something.
Exactly.
Pilot light's gone out or whatever it may be. There's some simple stuff there. So as we mentioned at the start, this podcast is sponsored by Survey Network. If you do need a survey on a residential property, if you're looking to get planning permission on something or a commercial property, then check out Survey Network and they can help you with surveyors. That is the first 7 questions on Google. We're going to call that part 1. Part 2, we're going to cover the second 7 questions. There's some great ones on there. Good topics of conversation. Things like, why are landlords selling up? Why don't landlords want children? Do the council have a list of private landlords? Is there a rental crisis in the UK? And some other detailed ones as well, which we're going to cover in part 2. So that's the first part of the questions. And the reason why we wanted to do this episode is because thousands of people are typing these into Google in the UK with the phrase landlords in it. So hopefully everyone's really enjoyed that first part. It's probably enough for people to digest in part 1. And then we're going to get stuck into part 2, which you'll be able to catch as long as you subscribe. You'll get the notification that the new episode is live. So please do, if you listen on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, if you're on the social channels, make sure you're following so you get the notification for part 2. And me and Andy are going to get stuck into that straight away, recording now, and you'll be able to check it out when you get that notification.